It's Wednesday. That means it's time for Helping Seniors of Brevard. I'm John Harper, and of course, we have, as always, Kerry Fink with us, and one of our favorite guests as well. But first, Kerry, good afternoon to you as we continue to fill in for Joe Steckler as he is still on the mend, and we know that he'll be up and about and ready to go here real soon.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, John Harper. It's good to be here. And hello, Bill Johnson. How are you today, sir?
Good afternoon, Kerry.
Yeah, we were just talking before the show about Joe. And actually, I was trading emails with Joe yesterday. You know, he is recuperating. He's feeling well enough that he's able to talk about having 3 hours a day of physical therapy. They're really working with him to get him back on his feet, and he's excited because he's working already on the 2021 Helping Seniors car raffle. So he and AJ Hires of the Boniface Hires Group are busy trying to figure out what cars would be on the list, on the wish list for the 2021 car raffle. It's a pretty fair bet that the Chevrolet Camaro will be back, and it's a pretty...
That was a popular one.
Yeah, and it'll be a pretty sure thing that the Dodge Challenger will be back. But there's a lot of nominations for cars that are out there. We've had somebody suggest, well, wouldn't it be nice if there was a Jeep? We've had somebody say, well, we liked it the year before when a pickup truck was an option. What do you guys think? What do you guys think?
Truck would be a nice change.
Yeah?
I think certainly a Jeep. The Grand Cherokee is quite a luxurious Jeep.
Yeah,
And,
you know, the fun thing about it is, you know, with Joe and AJ Hires going back so many years on all this, I think they're going to try to get a mix of cars and do the same thing where the winner can pick the one that they want. But it's always fun, and I'm hoping in 2021, unlike this year, we'll actually be able to get out and have people take a look at these cars. Because, you know, that was one of the things that people enjoy so much, that we would be out at either a senior expo or some location where people could actually look at the cars, and they always loved it. It ended up looking like a car lot because you would see a husband and wife come out, and the oftentimes the guy would be looking at the muscle car, and the girl would be like, "I like the truck." You know, it was really fun to see. So we'll see where all that goes. But Joe is already busy at work putting that together, and I don't know, guys, if you have had a chance to pick up yet the December issue of Senior Scene, or if you were able to see Friday's edition of Hometown News, because both of them featured an article about Joe Steckler. It's called Helping Seniors Salutes Founder, and has some great quotes from a lot of the board members had made a comment about Joe's work over the years and how Joe has really been just a fixture in the community as far as advocating for seniors. I don't think a senior could have a better friend, actually, than Joe Steckler. And one of the things that was kind of interesting about that whole process is there is we just nominated Joe for an award called the BAS, which is Brevard Assisted Housing. I forget what the acronym means, but
Brevard Association of Human Services.
Thank you. Now somebody who knows this, because you're an elder law attorney and you know this. Anyway, we just
former president.
Okay, well, Bill, there isn't a whole lot you haven't done, but we just nominated him. They have a superheroes award, and I certainly advocate that Joe should get that. So anyway, we'll keep all that moving. So what we thought we would talk about today on the radio, since we. You remember we were just watching the Charlie Brown Christmas special, and you remember how was it Lucy, who was always the psychiatrist, is in thing, and you would see Charlie Brown would walk up, and you would see that. Well, today the board certified elder law attorney is in, and so I was asking Bill. I said, "What do you think we should talk about that would be appropriate at this time of the year?" And as you know, every time we get to the end of the year, everybody has to start kind of figuring out. Let me make a plug here. It's not too late to make a year-end donation to Helping Seniors of Brevard and make that work for your 2020 taxes. But also, I guess it is a thing when you get to the end of the year that you have to start figuring out everything that you needed to button up for this year, but also make a good plan going forward for the next year.
Correct. And, speaking of taxes, if you have an IRA, you got to make that required minimum distribution or get penalized before the end of the year. So that's always a big one that most people have on their plate to get done before December 31st.
Yes, yes. And and you and I have talked about this so many times, and I know you and Joe have done radio and TV shows about this, but it also becomes a time when people, when they do those things, don't they start thinking like, oh, I should gift a child this and this and this and this. But I've heard you talk many times, you want to be like very careful about how you do those kind of things around the holidays because you don't want to inadvertently put yourself in a situation down the road that it would have not been beneficial to do so.
Correct. And I think you're talking about the look back period for Medicaid and
or now
VA aid and attendance, and how that can negatively come back and disqualify you from getting benefits.
Yes, exactly. So what do you recommend, or how do you think people should sit down at the end of the year, and what are the things that they might want to think about?
Well, usually the end of the year is a moment of reflection. Mm-hmm. We finally get a break, and usually it's a little longer than just a day or two. We usually have our family around us,
right?
And everybody gets together. Though in this year it might be a little different. You might be gathering on Microsoft Teams or Zoom, and it's a time to reflect what's happened in the past year and how things may have changed, especially when it comes to with regard to your legal documents.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, one thing, has there been a death, a divorce, a marriage, a birth? All those things can play a role in whether or not you want to modify not only your estate planning documents, like a will or a trust, but also maybe who's going to be your power of attorney, your healthcare surrogate, and your, on your living will. And a common thing is, throughout the course of the year, maybe somebody got ill.
Yeah.
Like on your power of attorney, for example, you named your husband as the one to make your financial decisions. Well, maybe back in March, he got diagnosed with dementia.
Oh, goodness.
And subsequently, that may not be who you need to be in charge anymore. You may want to, go back and change that and then maybe name one of your kids to be in that role. So it gives you a moment to reflect on not only your estate planning documents, your incapacity planning documents, like your advance directives and powers of attorney, and then also, what about long-term care? What is the plan? It's a good time to maybe have a discussion with the kids and your spouse and maybe your parents even about what your wishes are. And then, once you figure out what the wishes are, then you might have to figure out how you're going to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And so that may be something you need to seek some advice on. But this time of year is a good time to get all those things out. A lot of people do all their documents, then they stuff them in a file cabinet somewhere and never look at them ever again. And subsequently, I ask people who's this or that on their documents, and they have no idea. They don't know what they did, and they may not have put a kid because the kid might have been a minor at the time. Now, I get people who come in and their kid's 30 years old.
Sure.
And their will still talks about them being, a child. So, that's a lot of things you can, think about, especially when you're having a gathering of folks.
Yeah, and you would think, especially if 2020 has taught us anything, is like you can never be sure what's around the next corner with all this. Because if somebody had said on New Year's Eve of 2019 that we would be all wearing masks at Christmas time, we would be thinking of social distancing, we would maybe forego traveling, we would forego maybe getting together with our loved ones at Christmas. I mean, I think most of us would have been like, what planet are you living on?
Well, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'll go see a lawyer when everything hits the fan, and then I'll get my documents done." Well, I don't know if you looked around, but it's already hit the fan, and we, and I ran an ad basically to that effect. Like if you've been putting this off because you wanted to wait till that special time, well, it's that special time. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and you really need to get your affairs in order.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about the point that you brought up. Is like you may have just assumed that when you put all this stuff together, that the person that you named to help you out, number one, would be available to help if it was needed now. And I mean, I've heard, we've all heard all these tragic stories about husbands and wives who both get the COVID disease, and one gets hospitalized, and maybe that was the person the other one was expecting to take care of them,
right?
If something were to go on, how do you?
And then not only do you get COVID and get hospitalized, but you get isolated at that point too,
right?
And then how do you pay your bills, and things like that when you can't even be around other folks?
Yeah, we were talking about that because it was so. I was glad to see it, but then I was thinking, boy, this is really tough. That Terry was going to be able to have Joe. We're talking about Terry Steckler, Joe's wife, was going to be able to visit him for 15 minutes. And I was thinking, that's probably, John Harper, like the first time that they've actually been even able to see each other since all of these things that Joe has been trying to work on his health about have taken place.
It's been rough for family members, loved ones, husbands, wives, and having 15 minutes for the first time in several months, that's quite a big deal, I'm sure.
Yeah.
15 minutes or a half hour, whatever it probably turned into. But, Bill, got a question for you, and that is when you have a client who is filling out his or her paperwork, and perhaps they're doing it from at home or in their office, what about the notary aspect of having that signed? How is that accomplished over the internet or over Zoom or whatever?
Well, Florida, as of July 1st, now allows remote notarizations. And there is a whole procedure. You can actually have a notarization done over Zoom or over the internet and have the witnesses appear. So there is a way to do that. There are certain restrictions on when you can do that, and you cannot do it for people who are in need of assistance with activities of daily living, which includes a vast majority of a lot of people I deal with who are in assisted living or nursing homes or getting care at home. So there are some restrictions on how you go about doing it. Obviously, the best way is to do it way ahead of time and not have to rely on that. And that was going to be my point, John, was talking about, we had the whole radio show on how hard it was at the very beginning of this. We have all these people who assume they're going to get ill, and then at the moment they get ill, they're going to do their power of attorney healthcare surrogate. Yeah. Well, they get ill, and with the pandemic, they get isolated. And we couldn't get to the people. And the facilities hadn't yet set up protocols to allow us, some way of getting a signature on a document with witnesses and notaries. So a lot of people got stuck in that. We, as I mentioned, I think on the other show, we improvised. We just told them, take the paperwork in, roll them up to a window. We'll stand on the other side of the window and witness and notarize. As long as we can. Florida's a line of sight state, so as long as we can actually physically see them sign the document, we can witness and notarize it. But yeah, it was a lot of improvisation going on. And, people didn't want to come in my office. Yeah. So they'd drive, and we just let them sit in their car. And we bring the documents out, and one person would approach, hand them the documents. They would sign, again, with the witnesses and notary down the sidewalk. But, yeah, it was a lot of improvisation. So don't assume... And other people get sick and have illnesses where they can't sign, all of a sudden they have a stroke and they're not mentally or physically able to execute the documents. So there are things, it's best to have all this done ahead of time.
Bill, what exactly is the procedure, however, for that notarization, and what do people listening to us right now who may become clients of yours, what do they need to think about in advance to having that done if they don't want to go outside of their home, go to your office or whatever? What is the procedure involved?
Well, we make house calls, so a lot of times I go to them. So that kind of helps us with that procedure. Now, the initial appointments, I've been doing a whole heck of a lot of those by phone, where we just do a phone consultation to get the information together, or by Zoom or Microsoft Teams, one of those. And then we'll get the documents, and then we'll go to them because they don't want to leave. Um, it's actually probably easier to do it that way than to go through the rigmarole of trying to do it digitally. And the reason I say that is there are certain protocols that have to be met. There are probably only a handful of actual digital notaries in the state right now. And then certain documents, if you electronically sign them, which means like signing on a tablet, you have to have it stored with a service that stores these documents. And they have to post a bond. And thus far, even though we have the laws probably pretty cutting edge, I don't think the industry is caught up to the law. Right. Which sometimes it's actually the reverse. You know, the industry is way ahead of the law change, but the law is actually ahead of the industry on this. So we are, there are beginning to be mobile witnessing notarization companies out there that will do this as a service for you. That is a cottage industry that's springing up. And you can see why we have a need for that, especially at a time like this.
Bill, what I'm interested in is a lot of people listening to us. This program is about helping seniors and everything associated with that, whether you are a child of a senior or a friend or whatever. As we all know, a lot of seniors are... Well, they're downright afraid, I guess is the word, to even use a computer. It's hard enough on a cell phone. They've got to get a jitterbug cell phone or something like that.
Well, it's a very good point because, when I mention Zoom or Teams to most seniors, they have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so how do you work around that obstacle, that roadblock?
Well, usually we do the phone interview and just use old technology, and then we actually go to them to have them sign it. Just do it the old-fashioned way. Because, there's a lot of newfangled ways to do things, but a lot of seniors just, it would be mind-boggling for them to attempt that. They just don't have the knowledge base.
Yeah, so if we come back to thinking about the things that as we get towards the end of the year, and all these issues kind of all rattled together in a way that suggests you really do need to take stock of what you've got and what you do. What do you recommend somebody does that says, I had all this done years ago, maybe when I lived up north and I just brought all the paper. It sits in a lockbox, in my hallway closet or something like that. What do you suggest people do?
Well, the first thing, as a general rule of thumb, you probably should review all the documents at least once every 5 years.
Okay.
I mean, just as a general rule of thumb. You should also review all the documents if there's a major life event in the family. Mm-hmm. Again, that would be a death, an illness, a birth, a divorce, a marriage, those kinds of things, because it may have an impact on what you put in your documents and how you do it. I have people who they want to leave some money to somebody, but they want it to be managed, by some other people. Mm-hmm. And so they name like a husband and wife to be in charge of the money of, let's say, a minor child. Mm-hmm. Well, what happens if the husband and wife get divorced?
Oh, wow.
I'm sure
Wow.
they're not really going to want to do that together.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if one of them's a non-relative, you know.
Right.
Yeah, so you really have to pay attention to those sorts of things.
Well, and then also there's the question, I guess, that comes up a lot of times today, because I've heard you talk about this too, is that you said Florida has some very, very strict rules about powers of attorneys and things like that. And so if you come in from a state where maybe, you could just say, I want so-and-so to take care of all this stuff, apparently it's not always that simple, right?
Yeah, it's more of an interpretation issue in Florida than it is an actual. We'll recognize your out-of-state documents,
Uh-huh.
but the way we interpret them may not be the way you want them interpreted. And so, generally, when you move from a state to another state, you should have an attorney in that state look at the documents.
And what if you're one of our snowbirds, somebody who maybe spends their summers up north where they're from, and then they come down here during the winters? This is a question I probably never asked, and I'm sure to some degree the answer is it depends on how often you're in each state. But I guess where if you're a two-stater, how do you figure out what documents you need for that situation?
Generally, you want your estate planning documents to be in your declared resident state.
Okay.
So let's say you're bouncing between New York and Florida, but you're a Florida resident. You have a Florida driver's license, and you spend at least 6 months here in Florida. You want your estate documents generally to be done in Florida and claim Florida as your residence. Now, the other documents, it gets a little more tricky because they can vary from state to state. So you may actually want to have two sets.
Okay.
Like a New York set and a Florida set.
So this would be
It'd
like
be the same people named in them, but it would just be, it kind of makes things go easier if, like, you're presenting documents that people in that state recognize. And so that, you don't have to have them interpreted. Basically, it's a document people are very familiar with and kind of wave you through instead of having to send it off to a legal department.
Yeah, no, that makes good
Right.
sense. So I guess we're almost up to our half show break, and as we come back, we're talking with Bill Johnson, board certified elder law attorney, longtime friend of helping seniors. We're talking about things to think about as we get towards the start of a new year. So we'll see you in just a moment with more Helping Seniors Radio.
You're listening to Helping Seniors of Brevard with Joe Steckler. Joe is off today, still recuperating from his knee surgery. Hope to have him back here in the studio with us real soon. But along with myself, John Harper, Kerry Fink is with us as well. And Kerry, we have one of our favorite guests, Bill Johnson.
Yeah, as we're talking about recuperating, I think I'm still recuperating from too much turkey at Thanksgiving, but it's been a good thing, and I hope that if you're listening today, that your Thanksgiving was a good one as well. It's been definitely unusual because we're all talking about COVID times, and John Harper, last week on the radio, we were talking with Jennifer Helen when she was in here, and we were talking about first of all, the CDC guidelines about, they didn't want you to travel. They didn't want you to maybe necessarily go over to someone's house and all these different things. And I remember Jennifer explaining they were trying to protect, I think it was like her 92-year-old aunt or something. So everybody made big adjustments. And I guess that's kind of what we're talking about today, Bill Johnson. As we've been talking about things that you want to think about from a elder law legal standpoint going into it. And during the break, I was asking Bill the question. I said, because I'd never really thought about it until we started talking about this, about when you are a two-state person, meaning that you're what we would normally refer to here as a snowbird, but you spend a significant time up north, and then you spend the other half of your year down here. Does that really complicate things for you as an elder law planner to help put things together? And how do you sit down with somebody who's in those situations?
Well, you kind of find out where their primary residence is, how often they spend in each state, what the assets are located in each place, who their decision makers are going to be, because they may a lot of people who belong or live in two states, part of the reason is they have children in those states.
Sure.
So it may be that you have to take into account that the power of attorney will have a child here for Florida, and then if they're in New York, it'll be a different child. So a lot of times you have to take into account the family factor.
Yeah, during the break, I was asking Bill, I said, well, does this mean, for example, that you might need two sets of paperwork depending on your situation? And I thought it was interesting, the story that you were explaining. It said the power of attorney form is so complicated, relatively speaking, here in Florida, because it goes into all kinds of detail, and maybe it's not so complex in a different state.
That's very true. You know, in Florida, a typical power of attorney here is at least 10 pages long, if not longer. And then you look at states like New York or Illinois, where they have statutory forms that are a page or 2 pages. And it's all based because in Florida, we make everybody who does one, you have to be very specific in the powers you give someone.
Yeah.
And in those other states, you don't. You can just check a box, real estate transactions.
Yeah, I remember you've done a number of TV shows. And by the way, folks, I want to give you, this is a good moment to let you reference the Helping Seniors of Brevard.org. That's the website, Helping Seniors of Brevard.org. I'll give you a minute to grab a pencil so you can jot this down again. But there is a plethora of television shows, Bill, that you've done over the years together with Joe Steckler, and you've really addressed some things, and in particular, again, at Helping Seniors of Brevard.org. I remember in particular, you did a show on something called Superpowers, which sounds like, maybe it's a Marvel action movie, but actually it has more to do with how we want to think about our paperwork here in Florida.
Correct. In Florida, if you do a power of attorney, you have to actually initial next to certain kinds of powers inside the document, either initial or sign. And those are like powers to change beneficiaries or create a trust and make gifts, a few other things. And if you don't have a signature or initials next to those powers, they're ineffective.
Wow.
Bill Johnson, how does the state of Florida and other states for that matter, how do they recognize a residency? What are the requirements for that? Anything specific?
That's a great question. Generally, you got to have a house or rent a house or have some sort of abode. Could be a boat even, I guess, located in the state. And then it is up to you. You can do an affidavit of residency where you actually sign an affidavit declaring yourself a resident of a certain state. But other than that, it becomes much of a subjective test. And what they are looking for is, you have a residence, whether it's owned or rented. You have a driver's license, a voter's ID card, those incidences showing that you intend to be a resident of that particular state. Now, you look back in the Bush years, the last Bush who was president, he lived in Washington, D.C., but his residence was actually Texas, okay? And obviously he was out of town for work. But that shows you, and I think the last election, President Trump, his residency was Florida.
Right.
So it becomes a very tricky issue if you have contacts with multiple states. Now, Florida does not have an estate tax, we don't have an inheritance tax, and we don't have a state income tax. But say somewhere like New York has a state tax, an income tax, and you get these people who are snowbirds in both places. They move to Florida, yet they keep that apartment in the city. Mm-hmm. They belong to a golf club in New York. And then you can see that things can be, what are your contacts, and can New York declare you a resident, and then they pop the tax on you.
Yes.
And registering a car in that state
Yep.
as well. That would be.
And it's a very interesting form. Basically, when you fill out the form to like liquidate a piece of property, and you say, "Oh, I don't owe the tax because I'm a resident of Florida," and then they will ask you on the form, "Do you belong to any social clubs in the state of New York? Do you belong?
Wow.
Do you own real property in New York? Do you?" And it asks, and basically you got to turn yourself in. Kind of, you're giving them the ammunition to come after you and tax you.
I was asking that question also during the break. I said, how often do you find yourself sitting down as you're helping somebody get all these, and I guess this is probably a higher net worth individual, but as they're sitting down and putting together maybe a more complex situation, do you find yourself sitting down with their tax planner, their financial planner, or somebody like that?
Yeah, in the more complicated estates, sometimes you're both. You have a financial planner and an accountant there to go over the implications for their investments, as well as the tax implications of what you're doing.
Yeah, it's so funny when we start having these conversations about states, because we always think of everything in this microcosm of the state of Florida. So it's fairly simple. If you're a guy like me and you're just in Florida, then it's at least it's just this one thing. But I imagine, Bill, for you, and there's another reason why clients would want to sit down and get some expert advice from you, is because if they are in a situation where they're involved in multiple states, it would be easy to make a misstep someplace along the way.
It would, and usually the general rule of thumb is if they move to Florida from somewhere else, move everything to Florida. Move all your accounts, all that stuff. Move it to Florida with Florida addresses and all that stuff. Now you can't obviously move that apartment in the city to Florida, but minimize your contacts with a state, especially one that's a high tax state, because you don't want them coming after you to try and tax your estate.
Yeah, I was asking that question too. Like, if you sit down and you're helping somebody on the topic of estate planning, which I guess, again, as you get toward the end of the year, one of the things we always like to do is, like you said, we like to reflect on maybe what we accomplished, or maybe the things we didn't get accomplished that we felt like we wanted to. And so, of course, that leads us to making our New Year's resolutions. Okay, next year I'm going to do this. Next year I'm going to do that. And I guess one of the questions that I have is, like, when you sit down with somebody and start to go over their situation and what they want to accomplish in estate planning, how often do you run into all that stuff about the other states and things like that?
Well, it's fairly common if somebody moved here from somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it all depends if they're moving, or if they're local or moving around the state of Florida, or if they've actually moved here from another state.
Yeah.
Bill Johnson, what about trust? What about the different types of trust? How are they used? How are they set up? And what are the advantages?
Well, there are more types of trusts than we can even talk about. But they basically fall into 4 categories. Usually they're either what we call living or testamentary. A living trust is a trust you set up while you're alive. A testamentary trust is a trust that gets set up by your death. And then we have the fact that they're either revocable or irrevocable. So you can have a revocable living trust. You can have an irrevocable living trust. You can have a revocable testamentary trust, I guess, or an irrevocable testamentary trust. So you run into those 4 types. Now, the irrevocable trusts are generally used to move assets outside of your estate, where you either give up the benefit or control of those assets for whatever reasons, applying for public benefits or tax purposes, or things like that. And there's a whole slew of irrevocable trusts out there. But generally, when we're talking about estate planning, we're talking about a revocable living trust.
Bill, can the trust be used to perhaps navigate around that residency issue?
Well, in your trust, you will declare a situs for the trust. And also, a lot of them have the ability for the trustee to change the situs of the trust if needed. Generally, if we're writing the trust, that's not a big deal because we're going to put Florida as the situs. But if you're moving here from somewhere else, like New York, your trust is going to say the situs of the trust is New York State. And we don't want that. So that's one of those things we look for in the trust to go and amend and get that out, change all references from New York to Florida.
This is a great question that you raised, John Harper. And actually, I was thinking, Bill Johnson, as you were answering some of this about this, that this is really a topic. I'm going back through the different programs and things that we've touched on, but I would love to see us do a TV program, a radio program, where we talk a little bit about trust, because most of us that are lay people, we've heard the term bandied about, but the honest truth is I don't know that we necessarily understand when one is needed and to who should be thinking about that. And I guess that's part of what you do when somebody sits down and says, well, here's where I'm at and here's what I want to try to accomplish in an estate plan.
Correct. And you have to figure out how to get from A to Z.
Right.
Generally with the least amount of hassle for their heirs.
Right.
So there are a lot of ways to do that. I think we've talked about how to avoid probate with beneficiary designations, joint titling, or putting assets in a trust. And we've had those conversations. But, yeah, generally you have to, the person, the standard for being able to do estate planning documents is they have to know what their estate consists of, who are what they call the objects of their bounty, their heirs, and how they want to leave the estate to those people. So you really have to get that information up front, and then you can figure out where to go from there.
So if we go back in and we're talking a little bit about where we started on the show, is like we get towards the end of the year and we're all like, well, now particularly with COVID and all these other things, I'm really thinking like, is all the paperwork I've got up to snuff? Is it really the right thing? Has something changed? It seems like it would be a great idea to, I'm asking, is this the moment where they ought to give you a call and say, I should sit down and have a consultation, at least let you look over what I've got and kind of help determine if I've got things lined up the right way or if some changes.
Yeah, generally they should have somebody look at those documents and especially, we'll break them out and read them first. Because it's amazing how many people don't know what is in their document. And so that would be the first step. And then if you need them reviewed, then go seek somebody who's qualified to do that.
Yeah, I think the vast majority of us, as soon as we get into a lot of the legalese of it, we've had this conversation so many times, people are always trying to oversimplify things, and then they make the mistake of running down to the office supply store and picking up a form that may or may not even be appropriate. And I've been around you long enough to have heard you share some horror tales about having to correct some of those.
I just had one 2 days ago.
Oh, my goodness.
They came in with a power of attorney that didn't really do anything.
Wow.
And in fact, it wasn't even a durable power of attorney because it didn't even have the language that's required.
Wow.
So they got sold a bill of goods to save a few $100, and now it probably costs a lot more.
That's what I've always understood too. Is that it's penny wise and pound foolish is really what it comes down to. But if somebody wanted to give your office a call and say, okay, here's where I'm at, how does that work? What's the numbers, and how does that get started?
Well, they can call us at 321-253-1667. Again, that's 321-253-1667. We do free consultations, and they just need to bring their existing paperwork, if they have any, in, and we can take a look at the situation.
It just seems so wise, in the middle. And usually, I guess this is another question. As an elder law attorney, I guess probably the end of the year and the start of a new year ends up being a busy time for you, right? Because people are starting to think about things like this.
It does. Well, that's a great question, and that's one of the areas I wanted to talk about. But while we got a few minutes, is during this time when we all get together, it is also a time when people notice whether or not things are going okay with mom and dad.
Right.
In the visiting or on the Zoom meetings, all of a sudden, when you talk to them on the phone, they said everything was great. And next thing you know, you show up at the house and you find out it's not going good at all. And so it can be a busy time, especially after the beginning of the year is when we get a lot of those kind of phone calls that, mom and dad are really neglecting, taking care of themselves and things like that. And we need to look at what our options are. Because that, a lot of times that doesn't become apparent until you're actually there with them.
Yeah, and that's probably complicated this year because I imagine there's a lot of people from up north who, because of all the considerations, are saying, wow, I don't know if we can get down there or if it's even wise to go down there this year.
Yes, I was on a canoe trip a couple weekends ago, and it turned out one of the gentlemen on the trip had somebody in his office get COVID, and subsequently he had taken a test, but it hadn't come back prior to the canoe trip. He didn't think he didn't have any symptoms. He didn't think he was going to be positive or anything. Well, he came back positive.
Oh, my goodness.
So then most of us on the canoe trip had to go out and get tested. And having been at the testing facility right before Thanksgiving, I can tell you it is a zoo of the amount of people trying to get tested before they go over to their parents' house for Thanksgiving, just to make sure they're not going to be spreading anything around that may end up killing their family members.
Yeah, I think that, if you're a loving son, daughter, niece, nephew, I would think you'd be thinking that way.
Yeah, and
I would hope so.
But the testing facility was just swamped with people.
Amazing. So again, I guess it probably just punctuates the fact that this year of all years, it really makes sense to pull this together, and maybe even if you have to do some remote planning with a Zoom call, you guys are able to do that as well. I remember we had this conversation sort of at the height of the outset of all this, that they deemed what you do as an essential business because the business of life just keeps going, and you guys are getting real creative about how you could meet with and work with clients.
Correct. And they didn't necessarily deem elder law as an essential business, but we fell into a lot of the categories of what an essential business is, and that's by the definition of the Department of Homeland Security, which got confusing because they had two different lists of what that was. They had one, and then they had an updated version that didn't seem to get circulated at the time the pronouncements were coming out. But we fell into a lot of the categories of what an essential business is.
Bill Johnson, if a listener wants more information about the various aspects of elder law, and I'm sure there are many other areas that we haven't even touched the surface of today, what's the best resource? How can they do some homework to delve into the many issues that exist today?
One is they can go to our website, which is floridaelderlaw.net, and that's floridaelderlaw.net. And the other one Kerry mentioned is going to the Helping Seniors of Brevard.org website, and there are a multitude of videos that you can watch on all of these subjects.
And also, you publish, I don't know if you have still copies in your office, but you publish a great annual resource that is really, I remember reading it and thinking, wow, this is really information that I had not been familiar with. That was, I would almost call it like a primer on things you need to know.
We still do that. We do it every year and update it every year. So we'll be working on that right at the beginning of the year because that's when it comes out.
Yeah, so I think so again, the phone number, if somebody wants to give you a call directly on it,
Is 321-253-1667. And even if you just want a free copy of the pamphlet, you can give us a call and we can mail that out to you.
yeah,
It's also available online on our website,
okay.
which is floridaelderlaw.net.
So important as we're sitting down and going through things at the holiday time. Let's do this the right way. Bill Johnson, board certified elder law attorney. You've been a friend of Joe's and helped Joe. I mean, going back to the outset before there was a Helping Seniors.
Yeah, it's scary that you guys are saying he's in rehab for 3 hours a day. I'm thinking, if this man gets active again, we're all in trouble. If you know Joe, you know just how active he is in the community and how nonstop he is.
That's right.
And certainly, if he gets his motor up and running again, we're all going to be busy.
That's good.
Bill Johnson, we're short on time, but in the remaining moments, if you are a member of a family, a son, a daughter of a mother or daughter that is going to need protection, how do you go about preparing for the guardianship aspect of getting ready to jump into this and work the various ways and means that have to be done?
Generally, we set up an appointment. Again, we do free consultations, but we talk about what kind of documents they have in place or don't have in place. We talk about the specific situation as to what is the mental or physical incapacity of the parent or grandparent, and then we look at, are the least restrictive means, being the power of attorney healthcare surrogate, going to be enough, or is this person going to not follow the direction of anybody and we'll have to go get a guardianship? Because a power of attorney, for example, is a contemporaneous grant of authority, meaning if I gave you power of attorney, that still does not stop me from going out and buying a car. So, sometimes we don't want that person to retain the power to go out and buy a car. And so subsequently, that's when we start looking into guardianships.
Yeah, so thank you again for sharing all this as we get into this end of the year stuff. We have just a moment left as we get into as we get toward the end of the radio show, and I did want to bring up the one thing that's going on for those of you that are paying attention to this. We have the Helping Seniors Foundation Cruise. That is now set for May the 30th. We're going to be on the beautiful MSC Divina, sailing out of Port Canaveral. It's a 7-night cruise that will stop at the beautiful Ocean Cay Marine Preserve. You'll be able to enjoy actually 2 full days there. It's like your own private island resort, and then on to Cozumel, Mexico, and Costa Maya. But with all friends from Brevard County, and it's a fundraiser for the Helping Seniors organization, and you get your information at helpingseniorstravelclub.com, helpingseniorstravelclub.com. So I just want to say that, we've been through Black Friday, we've been through Cyber Monday, but this is a great Christmas gift concept or a gift idea for the holiday season too, because if you book before January 5th, they've got an arrangement where you buy the cheapest cabin on the ship, the inside cabin, and you get upgraded to a balcony. So if you're looking for a great way to go sailing safely, that's the way to go. And so, John Harper, with that, I think we've concluded today's edition of Helping Seniors Radio.
That, by the way, Kerry, that is just an incredible deal.
Yes.
I mean, you and I, many of us have cruised for years. You've never heard of one like that.
No, you buy the cheap cabin and you get booted to a beautiful balcony. And on that ship, they have very nice staterooms, very nice balcony cabins. We've sailed it a couple of times. Just a beautiful ship to sail on.
All right, good deal. I'm looking forward to that. Bill Johnson, thank you as well for being with us. Again, one more time, that phone number, Bill, for people to contact you.
It's 321-253-1667.
All right, and that's Bill Johnson, elder law attorney here in Brevard County. Thanks, Bill, for being with us. Kerry, Fink, thank you as always, and we send our best wishes for a speedy recovery to Joe Steckler, and hope to have him back here behind the microphones real soon. That's going to do it for today's edition of Helping Seniors of Brevard, heard every Wednesday, 12 noon to 1 o'clock.